This has been this has been a lot of fun. But before we get to our final two questions, you have quite the birth story we need to hear.
Yeah. So,
I've been
okay.
there
So
too. I've been through this. So
it's shenanigans. It is the craziest like thing. It's amazing what the human body can do. Yeah, so when I was pregnant with my son, um, I had the I loved being pregnant. It was the easiest pregnancy. Everything was awesome. Um, and so until the end, like I started like sort of having like symptoms of preeclampsia. So they were like, "We're taking you in. You're getting induced."
mm-hmm.
So I went in and they started the induction, which took forever because he just was like, I'm cool in here. We don't need to. I don't need to come out." Um, and so I was there, like I got admitted on like a Friday night, and I was there all of Saturday, all of Sunday. Early Sunday morning, like they gave me Pitocin, which really just like you go into labor pretty much instantaneously.
Mm.
Um, and it's not comfortable, it's not fun. And so I had asked for an epidural because I was like, I'm not going to make it out of this if I don't have something for this pain. So I had the epidural, and that, but also when you have the epidural, it like slows your pregnancy because your body's not, you know, it doesn't know when to push, it's not feeling those contractions
Oh.
and things like that. So was in labor like all day, like just kind of hanging out waiting. Finally, after like 12 hours, they were like, either you're going to like have your son naturally, or we're going to have to send you in for a C-section because you've been in labor for too long.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, I had some really wonderful nurses who like had me like go on my side and have like a peanut ball between my legs. And luckily, he decided that he wanted to come out at that point, so I could start pushing. And I only had to push for like 20 minutes, but once I started pushing, my doctor, the guy who is a runner and was like, "Oh, you're fine, everything's fine." He was like,
The one who passed out.
yeah, the one who passed out. He was like sort of he's like kind of a a good local doctor. So like all of the medical students were that work for him, like one of them was like sort of like in charge of like the birth, but he was there
Mm.
like overseeing. And while I was pushing, it was like the funniest thing ever because he was just like sitting there and he just looked bored. Like he had his hand like this. It's like 11:40 at night. He's exhausted. Everyone's exhausted. He's just like sitting there like this. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, like everything must be going great because I mean, he's not even worried. And then all of a sudden, he just like jumped up and like went into action. He pulled my son out, and what I didn't know at the time was my son had the cord around his neck twice and wasn't breathing. He was
Oh
like
my God.
purple, and still like they did that. They put him on my chest, and he was purple. And they were going. The nurse was going, breathe, breathe, and I thought she was talking to me. So I'm going, and then all of a sudden my son cried, and everybody was like, "Oh, okay." So at that
Yeah.
point too, all the Barbara Bush doctors had come in too and were in there like working on him to make sure he was okay, which he was totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly a very jarring experience for everyone
So
involved. And
scary.
my mom, yeah, my mom and my husband were both in there and knew what had happened, but I didn't see it, so I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
until later. But so after that, and they get him all cleaned up, and then they're doing everything, and everybody sort of leaves. It's like me and my husband, our brand new baby, and the nurse, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna take your epidural out now." And I was like, "Okay." So they had me sit up, they pull the thing out, and the thing about an epidural is like it basically makes your body feel numb. So like you can't like once you have an epidural, you can't move, you can't eat, you can't do anything
Mm-hmm.
because you can't feel your legs. So the minute they took the epidural out, they were saying to me, they're like, "You're gonna start feeling sensation in your legs again, and blah blah blah." So I was like, "Okay, great." So then I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, "Can I like stand up?" And the nurse was like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, why?" And she goes, "Your legs, like you're not going to be able to stand up." She goes, "You might think that you can stand up." She goes, "But you're not going to be able to
Oh
stand
no.
up." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'm like sitting there, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and like Matt's over like changing our son's first diaper, and the nurse is filming it with my phone. And I'm like sitting on the bed, and I'm like, I'm just gonna try it, like see if I can stand up. And I'm like, so I stood up, right? And I felt great. Like, oh my God, I was like, I was ready. Like, I was walking around the room, and the nurse turned and saw me, and she's like, sit down. Like, she like yelled at me, right? And I'm just like,
Oh.
what? And she's like, you need to sit down. Like, you can't do that. And I'm like, but I feel fine. And she's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, okay. So I sat back down, and then she was like, well, so she took me into the bathroom. She's like helping me get cleaned up and stuff. And I'm standing and she's helping me. And she's like, you're really, she goes, you feel fine? I'm like, I feel great. She goes, really? I said, I was like, I feel awesome. And she was just like, this is so weird. She literally was like, this is so weird. She goes, I've never seen anything like this. She
Wow.
goes, you're very strong. And I was like, oh, thank you. But I remember too, she was like, when we leave this room, because she was like, don't tell anybody I'm letting you like walk around. And I'm like, okay. And then she goes, when we leave this room to like take you up to your like birthing, like your room in the hospital, she goes, you need to take the wheelchair. She goes, you cannot walk. And I was like, okay. Because I was like, can I like carry him? Can we walk? And she's like, no, absolutely not. I'm like, okay, okay. But yeah, it was just so funny. And like she was telling everybody, so like by the time we got up to like the floor where we were going to be, like all the nurses were coming in and being like, you're not in pain, like you're walking around, like stand up, show me that you're walking around. And I'm just like walking around. I'm like, do you want me to do a jumping jack? And they're like, no, no, no. And like, but I felt totally fine. And then like the next day, even like all the nurses are coming in and they're offering me Tylenol and they're offering me all these things. And
I
I
don't
kept
need it.
saying, no, no, no. I know. And I looked at Matt at one point because I was getting like really irritated because like I was like, why do they keep offering me like pain medicine? And he looks at me and he goes, because you just had a baby. And I was like, oh yeah, I did. But
That's
like
kind of a big
I
deal.
felt great. And I really like, I 100% believe that like the reason that like I could do all those things and I felt great was because of running. I mean, I ran through my whole pregnancy, and I think without that, like I don't think I would have been in such a good place when, I had him. But yeah, it's crazy. The body can do amazing things.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
You
amazing.
defied all the odds. You like surprised all the nurses and ugh.
Oh yeah, they were like that lady was she was like mortified. She's like, "Sit down. What are you doing?" I'm like, "Nothing. I just want to walk around. I haven't walked for like 12 hours,
Yelled
But
at
yeah.
you